Hey everyone, welcome back to the Running Science Happy Hour presented by Novell USA. Appreciate you joining us once again. Before we get going, if you don't mind just muting yourselves for now, and then we'll open up later on for questions and discussions. So I'm going to let people kind of trickle in. I have to admit people as they come on. So just bear with me here. I am recording this meeting again, so I will post this again on the web page that was shared in the email. Okay, so a lot of familiar faces and names that popped up. I will, before we get started, I will mention one thing I saw. I saw Kevin Sullivan was on here. Kevin and I don't know each other very well, but Kevin, I'm sure you can hear me, but I had a poster of you when I was a kid in high school. Kevin is the Kane record holder in the mile at 1500. And so it's really cool to have you on here, now a head coach for distance at University of Michigan. Okay, so again, thanks again for coming on. People are trickling in. This is our third edition of the Running Science Happy Hour. As always, I want to start by saying thank you to Novell USA. Maria Pascal is on the call right now. As I say every time, Novell is sort of a leader in the force measurement world in biomechanics, and they do so much for the biomechanics community. Again, they sponsor all sorts of events in biomechanics, and then they were gracious enough to sponsor this kind of crazy idea for this Running Science Happy Hour. So thanks quite a bit to Maria and Susan. Susan can't be on here today, but she sent me an email saying that Maria would be here. So Maria, if you want to say a few words, go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to thank you again for the opportunity to do this. And it's great to see some familiar faces, but even better to see new and different faces in a world that we kind of remotely visit once in a while, but aren't necessarily always as tuned into. So again, it's great to listen to these discussions and hear what everyone's saying and talking about, and to understand how technology, especially force or pressure measurement technology, may assist in answering some of the questions or things that are discussed. So thanks, Max, for hosting these. They've really been great, and thanks for the opportunity. And if anybody has any questions, I'll stick my email in the chat again. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Maria, as always. So just for those who are new to the chat, just a quick sort of overview of how this started. Basically Twitter discussions in 2020 were abundant, and a lot of conferences were canceled. And we typically discuss and network at these in-person conferences that we couldn't attend this year. So figured I'd start this sort of, happy hour session, if you will. Of course, sometimes it's at 11 a.m., which I suppose for all the Brits joining, it's about happy hour time. But it's worked out pretty well. The goal is to get people from the running science world to sort of mingle with people outside the running science world. I'm a big proponent of that. I think it's important for us scientists to have conversations with coaches and athletes and clinicians and support staff. And so throughout the conversation, the idea is to basically talk to our invited speaker, a special guest, about some of the questions that were sent in, and also hopefully you can post questions in the chat room so that we can can discuss various topics that might come to mind. And as has happened in the past, the discussions sort of happen organically, and I don't have to do a whole lot. So most people sort of drive the conversation, so that's great. So make sure you get involved. I know a lot of scientists that have joined. I've been here in the past, so. And some of you I know will have questions for our guest speaker. I will moderate things. I will keep track of the chat questions, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I want to introduce a friend, former distance runner, actually 218 marathoner, and I believe about 4:03 or something like that in the mile. recently sub 5 miler at altitude. So that's like a 4:30 mile or something, right? Head coach of NAZ Elite, Northern Arizona Elite. Also someone who's heavily involved in the running world, organizing events, all sorts of events, doing lots of outreach via NAZ and a lot more. So Ben Rosario, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks, Max. Thanks for having me. Thanks to everyone who's here. I don't have the view where I see everyone, but I do see Veronica. Hello, Veronica, and others. Yeah, let's do this. I'm ready.
Awesome. Okay, well, thanks again. So like I said, a bunch of questions were submitted via email and on Twitter. And the whole premise is to sort of merge science and applied coaching. We've got Dr. Daniel Greenwood on the call as well. And Daniel is the director of our HPC in Memphis, and he's sort of a skill act guy. I will bring him in a few times for this. So before we get started, Ben, can you sort of give everyone, I know not everyone is tied into the running world as much as some others are, a bit of the origins behind NAZ Elite from inception to now, if you don't mind.
Sure. Our group started in 2014. But what happened was I had owned running stores in St. Louis, Missouri from 2006 to 2012 called Big River Running Company with a good friend of mine, and we co-owned the stores. But after 6 years, I decided to sell my half of the business to him. And so my wife and I and our 1-year-old daughter moved out to Flagstaff, not really for any reason in particular other than it was a different place and a cool place to live. And we just figured we'd do that and find our way from there. So I worked with Greg McMillan and his online coaching company for a year. And then I started working with a couple of elite athletes here in Flagstaff. And that was kind of the light bulb moment because I really enjoyed that. I kind of been just figuring that something would come to me. And that's basically what happened is I thought, oh, okay, this I could do, this I enjoy. And so my approach was very businesslike, having started and successfully run a business before. I just did the same thing, really. I created a business plan. My wife has a business mind, and we launched in January of 2014 with 9 athletes. Of course, we had to fund it with our own money. Like any business, you need upfront capital. I think we spent about $40,000 in 2014 of our own money to send these athletes to meets and paid them little small bonuses for performances and things like that. Gear, travel, all that. And it after a year was working very well from a performance standpoint. We had won a couple of national titles. Kellen Taylor had won the US 25K championships. Amy Van Alstyne had won the US cross country championships. We'd produced some fast times, but that's not that unique. A lot of people run fast, and what I think was separating us actually was the fact that we were really creating a brand. So our website was really sharp via my wife. Our social media game was on point. We were really active and engaging with our fans. And of course, some of the athletes like Stephanie Bruce and others were really good at that kind of thing. And so that created some value for us. And then by the end of 2014, we finally had a few shoe companies interested, which was great because it gave us some leverage. And in early 2015, just when I was about to say, hey, this is not going to last forever, Kellen ran a great debut marathon 2:28, which was the 6th fastest US debut by a female at that point. And that really kind of solidified everything we had done, I think, to that point, performance-wise. And then Hoka really took the next step in terms of negotiating with us. And yeah, we ended up signing a deal with Hoka in January or I guess February of 2015 that was a 3-year deal. Then we signed another deal with them. And now we're on our 3rd deal with them that just started this January that takes us through 2024. So I kind of pressed the fast forward button there. But the point is that the group was started by my wife and I, and it was started with the purpose of becoming a brand in the running industry that could be valuable for potential sponsors.
Thanks for that, Ben. I think it's important for people to realize that, you know, some of the, like these things, professional running doesn't just sort of happen. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that needs to happen first. And so thanks for sharing that. Okay, so let's get down to some business here. Some really solid questions. We'll start with some training related questions, I suppose. There's some people on here that posted questions that follow you, Ben, and kind of keep up. And someone asked about, they're wondering about the rationale behind 9-day over 7-day cycle. And so it is the purpose behind that to have 2 days recovery between sessions, more high intensity sessions, and maybe packing in more long runs in a training block, or other reasons?
Well, I don't really think of it that way. I guess the way I think of it is, when we're training for most events, sans marathon, so everything except the marathon, we usually do sort of a 2-week cycle. So Tuesday is hard, Friday is hard, Sunday is regular long, Wednesday is hard, and Saturday is hard long. And then we repeat.
Got it.
So the reason being, I like to space out the hard sessions. I like to give plenty of recovery between the hard sessions, because they could be harder then, in my opinion. And, you know, the old coaching cliche is that every day is just as important as the next. But I think we really know, gun to our head, the hard days are the most important. And so I like those days to be very hard. But in order for that to be the case, we need to be able to recover, and this, especially at altitude. Now, for the marathon, we actually are more of a 7-day schedule, but there's really only 2 hard days. There's a big midweek workout and a big weekend workout, and that's it. And that's nice, because it gives me the opportunity, or I guess the opportunity to move things around if necessary. So let's say I had a big, huge marathon specific session on Sunday, and then the next session was scheduled for Wednesday. But after I looked at what happened on Sunday, I decided we needed to wait till Thursday for that next session, that midweek session. We could do that. And so it's just, that's how we do the marathon, because the mileage is so big, and it's so much about those big marathon specific sessions. So it's really just 2 different types of cycles we use, that 2-week cycle, and then that marathon 7-day cycle.
Sure. Makes sense. Thanks, Ben. Dan Feeney, I think, is on the call. I saw him earlier. Asked the questions related to info from the book Inside a Marathon that you and Scott Fauble wrote. So Dan, if you're still on, would you mind asking your question specifically to Ben about the long runs?
Sure. Thanks for calling on me, Max. I feel honored. Yeah, Ben, so I really enjoyed your book. I read it leading up into a marathon of my own last year. One of the things that I thought was interesting, you alluded to really liking super maximal long runs, like 28 to 30 miles for some athletes. And personally, I've also liked doing a couple of those. My kind of question was, how do you select, like, do all your marathoners do those? Or if not, how do you select who does them?
All right. Thanks, Dan. I'm not sure where you saw 28 to 30. I think I've had one athlete do one 28-mile run. We do a lot of really long efforts. I don't know that we've gone that long. We do 26 for sure. And that's pretty much everybody. So let's see how to answer this. I mean, I don't individualize that too much, because I feel like the race is 26 miles long. So we have to be prepared for it, no matter who you are. The mileage overall might be different for different athletes, but I rarely change the specificity of the marathon long run itself. So whereas, you know, Kellen Taylor might run 10 and 4 the day before that huge 26 miler because she can handle it, somebody else might only run 8 and 4, or maybe just 1 10-miler, you know, just little differences in the overall volume of the week. But the specific work is specific for a reason. You have to be ready to race at the end of the marathon. So like that 26 miler we do usually includes 6 miles at marathon effort from mile 18 to mile 24. And then the last couple miles easy. And that's for everybody, regardless of who you are.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So on that, I think you touched on something important there, Ben. So you coach, obviously, marathoners who are also, I hate to use the word marathoner, because you've got someone like Kellen, of course, who can run marathon in 2:24, but also can run 15:11 for 5K. And we know
she'll run faster.
Probably
than that
faster.
this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. So, so it's not just marathoning, it's also, middle distance running to a certain extent. So there's different athletes on the team. So let's just, I'll do selfishly, I'll bring in Lauren here on this conversation. So obviously Lauren runs very different than how Steph Bruce or how, Kellen runs. And so you mentioned I might not program the overall volume the same way because of different people. Can you talk a bit about that? Maybe a bit in terms of the biomechanics of these runners and how you make those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, the ability to handle volume is pretty closely related to biomechanics in my experience. So Lauren, because she's such a 4-foot striker, really, midfoot, 4-foot striker, she's just that type of foot strike is great and it's really fast, but it typically can't handle as much load overall as someone who strikes a little bit more like Steph, a little bit of a heel striker. So, Lauren will get more days off over the course of a segment. She'll run 8 miles one day and then 6 and 4 the next, and then do a workout and then kind of repeat that. Whereas those days in between workouts for a Kellen are probably 10 miles in the morning and 4 miles in the afternoon every day. But the workouts that they do together, the hard stuff, is usually pretty similar. Sometimes Lauren will have a little less volume, but again, I believe in the types of workouts we do, and I like high volume workouts. When I say workout, I mean the hard days, the hard sessions. And so, if I'm taking away volume from Lauren, it's in the way I'm doing it is those easy days, that's where the volume is less for her, or like the day off. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically you can make decisions knowing how different runners might experience load because of how they move. And as a result, you might sacrifice the total volume, but you keep the quality there.
Yeah, and injury history as well. I have a huge advantage over anybody here that's a high school or college coach, because I've got a lot more years. We have many more years of data on these athletes. That's one of the first things we're asking them when they come in is, what's your injury history? What was your volume before? What seemed to cause these injuries, et cetera. And so, we're operating on a little different level in terms of the data we have. But yeah, all those things come into play.
Right. So on that topic, Ben, Mike Wortley, who's on the call, just posted a question. Mike was finished up his PhD when I was starting at UT in Knoxville back in the late 2000s. Mike asked, what's your process for getting to know new athletes, which I think is actually a really solid question.
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of it is we try to get out in front of most of it via talking to them beforehand during the recruiting process, talking to their college coach during the recruiting process if this athlete's coming straight out of the NCAA. Just getting to know as much as we possibly can before they ever even get here is part of it. So hopefully we're making the right choice. Hopefully this person fits in with what we do physiologically, from a culture standpoint, et cetera. But then once they get here, there is a learning curve in terms of seeing how they actually respond to what we do. And it's really just communication, I would say. So just little informal things. And so, we do 8 by a K, and, the next day at practice, I come to practice every day. So, hey, Lauren, how you doing? How you feeling? You just kind of, a lot of it's intuitive. So you're seeing hey, does this person look like crap? The next workout after this type of workout? Do they look like they've got a bounce in their step after this type of workout? And you just sort of take these mental notes over time and you see what the athletes respond to, not only physically, but mentally as well. And you begin to understand, hey, Scott Fauble, for example, before a big race, all you have to do is give him a little 3-mile cruise tempo. He doesn't really need anything else. He just wants to get that behind him and get to race day. He doesn't need any little confidence booster from that last session. Whereas maybe somebody else would like to run a fast 300 at the end of the session just to feel a little quicker. Those little things are what I'm looking for, and they happen over time. Sometimes it's a big hit right away. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but I would just say you're really trying to pay attention to how athletes respond to certain types of workouts.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I think for many of us who are scientists, when we study running and potentially running injuries and factors related to incidents of running injuries, we rarely have this type of all access with athletes in the studies, right? So it's really difficult to day-to-day make adjustments. So I think it's important to understand for biomechanists and other scientists involved in research that, at the elite level, sometimes, and I would say probably most often, the day-to-day interactions almost serve as this athlete monitoring platform where because you're so in tune with and in touch with the athletes, it almost serves as an athlete monitoring platform that many people are after. Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, it's as if it's a questionnaire. If you weren't there, it would be the same sorts of things you would put on a questionnaire. How did you feel on a scale of 1 to 10? Did you sleep well? All these things. But I'm asking these things informally.
Right.
It's the same thing, but it's just like you say, I get to do it in a different way.
And it's interesting because your brain effectively becomes a motion capture system. And there's a lot about, I know there's a lot of biomechanics on here, but what Kellen Taylor looks on a good day, what Steph Bruce looks like on a good day, and so on and so forth, right? So on a given day, you might say, oh, something's up. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I'm going to investigate. Where, us biomechanists, we're spending all this money on this fancy equipment, and we're asking very objective questions, and we're tracking things objectively. And but in reality, at the elite level, you're able to make these observations on the fly in a way, and then you get the input from the athletes. So we've got a question, Ben. You've got your hand up. I'm not sure how I do this, but I think you just go ahead and.
Yeah. Thanks, Max.
Yep.
Ben, from what I've gleaned, at least, which is a very partial picture, so feel free to correct me. It seems like you make some maybe atypical choices in how you structure your marathon buildups. It seems like backloading a lot of the marathon specific work, whereas some people in their buildups might want to put a little distance on that marathon specific work in the lead up to the race. And so I'm a little curious. Well, one, I guess, if that's correct, and then two, how you kind of arrived at that and the rationale behind that structure.
Yes, I would say you're analyzing that correctly. One overarching thought there is we want to be the most specific, the closest to the race, and it's just, I think that's a philosophy I have, whatever the distance is. We also want to be not only the most specific, the closest to the race, but we want to be building, I don't want to feel like we're ready to go 6 weeks out. And I know that's a nerve-wracking thing. I feel it from the athletes, although less now because we've had so much success, but 7 weeks out, 6 weeks out, if the athlete doesn't feel like they're ready to run this marathon, they can really start freaking out. But you got to remember that only the day matters. And so you have to be ready on that day. So yes, I like our biggest marathon specific sessions in the final 8 weeks. I don't really like us to be in that great a shape before that time. Everything is leading to those final 6 weeks out, 5 weeks out, 4 weeks out, 3 weeks out. Those 4 big sessions, those particular weekends are our biggest sessions. And in fact, if the segment is even shorter, and that depends on when the last segment ended, et cetera, sometimes that's 5, 4, 3, and 2 weeks out. Oftentimes we've had a pretty big session 2 weeks out, including before the trials, because that segment was pretty short. And the reason is, yeah, I want to be the most ready on the day.
One follow-up, is that anxiety inducing for you too, to be fitting those sessions in and hoping they recover as that window of time to recover gets tighter and tighter?
Less so now, and I'll tell you one more thing that I've learned. So I hate this term because it sounds like you're doing something wrong, but I like piling them on, if you will. But what I found is, so I'll do this condensed block, and it depends on, again, the segment and maybe a race you have midway through or whatever. But somehow I like this condensed block. Let's just say it might be like 9 weeks out, 8 weeks out, 7 weeks out. That's really difficult. Like even the midweek workouts are difficult and the weekend workouts are difficult, and the mileage is pretty high. And then we take a recharge week, pull back on the mileage. Midweek workout is very easy, recharge, and then down the stretch, actually, it's not that hard except for those big weekend workouts. You know what I'm saying? So instead of, a week where midweek we did 5x2 miles and then the weekend had a hard 20 miler with a lot of work inside of it, the midweek workout becomes 10x800 smooth. And then the weekend workout is even harder than it was earlier in the segment. And the mileage is a little less overall. I really took that from the Japanese. So the Japanese, they're totally correct. They say, because I think there's a theory that, you should do the marathon specific work. You should be so tired when you do it. And what a Japanese coach, Katsuhiko Hanada, told me was, why would you want them that tired? Like, you don't want them tired on race day. You want them to feel like they're going to feel on race day when they do the hardest, most specific sessions. And so when he was looking, we were looking at each other's training, and he's like, make this easier. So down the stretch, I know what you're saying. It looks like we're cramming this crazy work on there, but it's really like 7 days in between, because the midweek workout isn't that hard coming down the stretch.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks, Ben's. Ben Rosario, do you mind if I just a follow up to Ben's question? Do you mind if I sort of just share some percentages and data from FOBs?
Sure.
In prep for the marathon project in December. So just to answer your question, Ben Raffleson, the Scott Faubles like training load before the actual marathon, 3 weeks out dropped about 5% from what he was doing, then 12%, then 26. And the week of was only about 15% less than what he normally does. And so just to give, just for perspective, your question was about, heavy load at the end. There was a reduction pretty linearly towards the marathon project, and Scott ended up running 2:09 for the second time. So some pretty impressive times, obviously. Him and Scott Smith both ran 2:09. That was really cool to watch. Ben Rosario let me play around with the NAZ Twitter that day. And so thanks for that, Ben. Okay, we got a couple of questions that popped up now. Let's see. Ben Gordon has a question. It's very long. I'm going to let you ask it so that I don't have to read the whole paragraph. Ben Gordon.
Hey, thanks so much, Max. I appreciate it. Ben, thanks for being here. I'm very excited. Huge Hoka fan, one of the flyers actually on the squad. So I'm a big Hoka guy. I'll admit that. But question for you is, many times in the workouts that you guys are posting, we appreciate there's a level of transparency that you have that a lot of other programs either hit or miss with. When you're doing these workouts, a lot of those are conducted in the Rocket X, the Carbon X, and other carbon-plated footwear. A topic that's come up recently in talks here, as well as something that we've covered in previous talks earlier today, is, are you seeing an incidence or issue of injury in regularly using these types of footwear in training outside of just races? Because I know that's a hot topic right now, and we're just curious to hear that, because a lot of the workouts that I see posted on Instagram, as well as some of the fan sites, include most of those training runs are conducted in that special tool footwear.
No, I don't think I've seen more injury. It's anecdotal. Injuries are part of the sport. We were injured occasionally in 14, 15, 16, and we've been occasionally injured 17, 18, 19, 20. I will say that we've had carbon plated shoes for longer than I think people realize. Hoka had carbon plated shoes that we were trying out as early as 2017. So it's not that new for us. Also, our carbon plated shoes aren't, from a structural perspective, they're not quite as dynamic as some of the other ones. The shape of the shoe, the structure of the shoe is still a shoe. It's not the quote unquote super shoes that you see. So I don't think they're terribly different. And it's what we race in. So I want us to be used to that energy return. And, you know, on a daily basis, we're trying to rotate some of the different Hokas, the Cliftons and the Mocs now that just came out, and the Rincon and different things. And I will say though that, that we are putting an emphasis right now, we just started this, on strengthening the feet. I should say an even bigger emphasis, because I don't want to knock AJ and Wes, Greg, our strength and conditioning coaches. They've always worked on our feet, but we're doubling down on that, because we do realize that the shoe technology is so amazing that perhaps our feet aren't doing as much work as they maybe once did. And so we've every athlete on the team now has the Toe Pro, which maybe some of you guys are familiar with, and they're doing daily exercises on that. We really want to eliminate any lower leg or foot injuries moving forward.
Well, on that topic, I definitely have to bring in Kim Hebert-Lozier, who's in New Zealand, but is on the call. I believe it's morning tomorrow for Kim. So, Kim, foot strength topic that you're involved with. So, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you know, your team is addressing this moving forward, particularly with the Nike Vaporfly. And I mean, there's some interesting research coming out now from the biomechanical perspective. I mean, I think from a research perspective, we're still not quite there in terms of whether or not foot strengthening prevents injuries. You know, we lack strong prospective studies, but you know, definitely, I think it's something that's worth doing. And yeah, I commend the team for doing it.
Thank you. So,
Max, let me just add that.
Yep.
It's part of my thinking is it's also trying to get out in front of the big difference when they go to spikes. You know, I think now that the shoes have so much more cushion, and of course that's Hoka, but that's other brands as well. All of a sudden, the switch to spikes is so dynamic from what it was, you know, years ago. Because I think years ago, the trainers you were trying to have these minimal trainers as well, you know, especially for faster elite type runners. And so the difference between the shoes and the spikes wasn't as great. So we're trying to get in front of that too, so that the lower legs are stronger. And, you know, I'm going to incorporate, you know, just the traditional barefoot strides and things this spring, so that we can be ready for the spikes and not wear spikes and then all of a sudden our Achilles hurts. That's my thinking anyway.
Thanks, Ben. So talking a bit about biomechanics here, as part of the training for the crew, you incorporate mobility drills and form drills. And I think that's a pretty interesting topic in the biomechanics world. You know, like this afternoon, you went out and set up some equipment for some of the athletes to do drills. What's the reasoning for you behind, how do you think about drills? Are you trying to change how they move? Are you trying to make them more mobile, stronger? You know, what's your train of thought there?
Our drill sessions, I'm thinking of a few points, right? So we want to work on quickness. We want to work on coordination. We want to work on range of motion. And ultimately, those things combined, we're working on our form and efficiency. So a lot of the drills are isolating certain parts of the gait cycle, maybe that paw grip portion of the gait cycle, maybe the the initial, the hip flexor piece, right? Opening up the hips. I think that there are a million different drills you could do, but if you think of it as, okay, do I have some drills in here that are working on quickness? They're getting them up and down off the ground very quickly. Okay, yes. Do I have some drills that are working on their range of motion? Okay, yes. Do I have some drills that are working on coordination? Okay, yes. Then you have a nice, well-rounded set of form drills. That's really what I'm looking for, because that's part of being athletic. It's part of making sure that they don't sort of get that like vegged out distance runner look to their form. I think years ago, the reason people's careers took a big dip at, let's say, 30 or so was because all of a sudden the athletes had been running so many miles for so many years. They just weren't as quick, and they didn't have that same range of motion. And so you're not going to be as fast. And now that the athletes are so diligent, and the programs are so diligent about staying on top of form drills, Meb Keflezighi is such a great example, right? He got injured kind of midway through his career and realized, hey, if I'm going to have a long career, I have to be more efficient. And I think a lot of the reason he was so successful into his late 30s was just that he was so smooth and efficient, and he was so smooth and efficient because he was so diligent about the drills.
Gotcha. So, I've observed you in various training sessions, including drills and mobility. Of course, as a biomechanist, this is very interesting to me, and I like to see how coaches interact with athletes and how they communicate with athletes about drills. And everybody's on a different learning curve, of course. So, do you find that even at the elite level, there's a sort of vastly different learning curve in how some of these athletes, especially new athletes to the team, how well they learn the skills, the drills, and so on?
Oh yeah, I mean, a lot of the athletes, surprisingly, are not very good at them at first, but that's
I don't think it's that surprising, really.
Okay, yeah, maybe you guys aren't surprised, but that's exciting in a way, because that means they can be that much better. The folks that are coming to my program, obviously we're very fortunate, but they're very good already at distance running. But if I see them and they look like wounded deer when they're doing their drills, that means, man, we can get a lot better, because that person can get that much more efficient. Certainly Stephanie Bruce is a good example, because I don't think she'd be the first one you'd pick if you were playing pickup basketball necessarily. But she's just been so good about her work and all her ancillary work over the years. And now you could make the argument that she looks more athletic and smoother and better on the drills than anybody on the team at the age of 36 or 37. And that's pretty cool, because that shows you what can happen over time. And that's certainly, I know it's anecdotal, but there's just no way you can't make the correlation between how good her form now looks from all those drills and how she's performing. And so that, to me, that's what it's all about.
Gotcha. For all the coaches on here, and even biomechanists, Daniel Greenwood, I think you're still on here. You're a skill acquisition expert. Would you just give us a quick rundown on, I guess, best approaches for teaching athletes new skills? Let's see. Daniel's still on here. Daniel, I see him on the chat. He might have boogered off. He's actually dog sitting our big dog. I'm in Flagstaff right now, so he might have had to deal with him.
Can you hear me now?
Looks like he's grabbing head.
Oh, there he is. Okay, there he is.
I was trying out my fancy new headphones, and it turns out they don't work. So here we are.
Yeah.
I was saying, well, my first response was that's an enormous question to answer really quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest thing that I think about so skill acquisition, I guess, is really about how we learn. And I think the biggest challenge we have is how we make sure that our behavior in training transfers to our behavior in competition. And so that's really where I see, I guess, what I consider skill acquisition. And I guess I have a natural sort of shiver that runs through my spine when I hear the word drills, because I tend to think them as really sort of isolated, almost really sort of separate to our traditional, like our running movements. So I guess, I mean, maybe it's just the verbiage, but even just using words like, I don't even just like exercises, or like if you call it a warm up or something instead, I think it takes a lot of the edge out of like a traditional drill is seen as this really sort of closed movement, really focusing on very specific motions, which the research shows don't really translate then to our running behavior. But by almost lengthening them out or making them a little bit more integrated with our running, we have a lot better transfer of the learning process or the actual change in our mechanics. But I think what Ben was getting at with some of his comments was that, in a way, some of what he was talking about was he didn't necessarily, correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but the drills that you were talking about, in a way, almost weren't necessarily teaching athletes to run in different ways, but we're almost challenging them physically to do things in different ways. So I'd almost consider if you could almost consider it cross training in a really elaborate context, in that they're actually just being tasked of doing something different, which sort of creates this sort of different adaptation in the body, which then translates to their running in a different way, rather than thinking of drills as a way to translate form from here to here. It's much more about like adaptations in the body. So I think we can be mistaken from thinking if I do 10 sort of proper steps here, that's going to translate to my running technique, at 5 kilometers. I think that's a mistake. But I think if you want to change running technique, I think you're at a different challenge than using sort of drills to change adaptations. Am I talking myself in circles, Max? I think I am.
No, I got you. And I think you hit right on what Ben is trying to achieve with these drills, Ben.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything there. When I say form, I guess I'm using it in a very vague way, but I don't mean that their actual form is necessarily changing. It's just they're becoming, to the naked eye, smoother and more powerful. And I do think the drills, I saw somebody in the chat say they're essentially plyometrics, which I agree with. But they're just making them more athletic. They're making them, or they're helping them learn to control their movements and being more in control of their body. I know I don't talk about myself too much as it relates to running, but I remember that very late in my own running career, if you will, I started doing these things sort of as my own guinea pig. And I began to feel just, it's hard to explain, but just in so much more control of my body and what I was able to do, not only in the drills or whatever you want to call them, but then it did transfer over to running for me. I did feel like I was able to run faster because I could feel those same sensations that I was feeling doing the plyometric type exercises and then transferring that over to faster running. That's why I like making sure that any sort of drills plyometric session ends or includes at least strides, because that's your opportunity then as an athlete to put it all together. So you've been working on quickness, you've been working on getting up and down off the ground, you've been working on opening up the hip flexors, whatever it might be, and then boom, you do some strides and you put it all together, and that's where the athlete can then begin to see the correlation.
Yeah, and I think if from a skill act point of view, we'd like to see that sort of relationship sort of being built in through your drill session as well. So you do an exercise and it's building into a run and going back and forth, rather than sort of doing all your drill work here and then add a run on the end, yeah, you're sort of helping that athlete merge those two things together so that you're not just isolating these random movements, you're showing them how these movements are related to their running, which in turn then makes them do the drill more effectively next time because they're almost understanding the purpose of what they're doing. And if you want to talk the basics of skill act, it's whatever you're doing is purposeful and making sure that both as Ben neatly described, he's quite clear in his purpose of the task that he's doing, rather than, the worst version of drills is we do our drills at the start because that's what everybody does, and we sort of jump up and down and swing our legs around for no apparent reason. But when you're merging them into running movements, you quickly see like why this knee here is helping me and why this sort of active foot before landing is helpful and why this pickup here is actually helping me.
Exactly. I think one of the things that you'll see at the high school level, particularly, is you have large teams and you see kids doing drills before workouts or races, and they could just not do anything and it would probably be fine because there's no purpose. It's not deliberate. As Daniel described, swinging your limbs around, like a pool noodle, basically. Having the purpose there is crucial. And I will say, I mean, Ben, we talked about this before, but I think one of the things that Ben does so well is the being deliberate with instructions, and I think that's really neat to see in action during sessions. Just to kind of follow up on this, as a biomechanist and following the literature and the research, obviously, especially with regards to bone health and development with runners, introducing drills, and a few people made comments in the chat, introducing drills doesn't just work on form and running specific things, but it also loads the musculoskeletal system differently. And I think this is valuable when you've got runners doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. So the side-to-side movements, the jumps, the cuts, those types of movements are basically challenging the not just the musculoskeletal system, but importantly the skeletal system. Knowing that bone stress injuries are common in distance runners, this provides a new stimulus, a positive environment for bone, because obviously running is not very good for bone growth, or it's not very osteogenic. So introducing new stimuli like that is also a really important aspect of drills in distance runners. I'm going to switch gears a tiny bit. We might come back if we have time, but Kate Harrison, who's on the call, now works at BOA in Colorado. Kate is Canadian. Hi, Kate. Kate went to West Virginia. She's a super rock star distance runner. And she has a question for Ben about team culture, really. So Kate, I'll let you ask the question.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. So as biomechanists and scientists, we all are really interested in injury and overtraining, and realizing now that doesn't really stem just due to, training load per se. Life stress could potentially play a big role. And one of the things I really enjoy about following the NAZ athletes is they're really open about sharing. They have tons of, other interests and passions outside of running. And that seems to be encouraged by the team, which is awesome. So I'm just wondering, how do you potentially accommodate for those, extracurricular stresses in training? Or do you feel sometimes maybe it detracts from, strict running performance at all?
Yeah, well, thank you for following. I agree that a lot of the athletes are great about sharing their other passions, and we certainly encourage them to have lives outside of running. I think it's super key, and we talk about that all the time. We're very fortunate to have such great role models on the team, whether it's Stephanie, who has a family, or Kellen, who has a family, or even some of the young athletes like Roy Linkletter, who's passionate vegan and loves, and he's a foodie, and all these different things. I think this is really good because then they kind of realize almost through osmosis that, oh, look at that person. She runs, then goes home and leaves running at practice and does all these other things, and yet she's the best person on the team, or she's one of the best runners in the country, etc. So I think that I forgot the last part of your question, but the bottom line is we think that those kind of things, those extracurriculars, those passions outside of running actually make you a better runner. I would hate to think that our athletes go to practice and then go on letsrun.com and then come to afternoon practice and then sit around the dinner table and talk about running. That's just too much. That's too much. It's like any other job. You should leave your job at home, or leave your job at your job, and home should be home.
For sure, for sure. And do you find you ever have to like alter training, you know, if things get
yeah, that was that part of the question I had forgotten. You know, I try not to, because I will say that it comes to a point where, okay, but this is your job though, you know, and you know, if you want to take on some of this extra stuff, I'm not going to push back on that too much unless I think I really have to, but the workout's the workout and you got to do it. You know, this isn't, you know, this is a profession. And so if you chose to shoot down to Phoenix to watch your daughter's soccer game, that was your choice, because when you come back up the mountain, you better be ready to go. So that's kind of how I see it.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So some conversation developing here in the chat, so that's good. Keep that up. We got a few minutes. You know, this.
Hey Max, can I jump in?
Yeah, of course.
I just wrote a little note, and I think it was a light bulb for me when we were talking about the drills and the exercises and things, and you were talking about how, hey, they need other stimulus. Think of it this way: if you were giving, I know you guys do this, so if you're giving a middle schooler, let's say, advice on running, don't we all say the same thing? We say, hey, don't just run all the time. Play basketball, play soccer, do other things, right? It'll be good for your development. Well, it's the same idea with collegiate athletes or pro. Now, we don't want them playing basketball anymore. We don't want them playing soccer or maybe snowboarding or anything like that, because now we've got to make sure they stay healthy. But that doesn't mean that idea isn't still present. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that, because in a way you're tricking adults into doing multi-sport.
Yeah.
It's kind of what
in a safe way, in a structured way, yes.
In a structured, controlled manner. Yeah, exactly. That's great. So obviously the group is based here in Flagstaff, one of the most, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful places in the world and one of the best places to train in the world. I know there's a couple of Boulder folks here who might disagree, but the topic about training at altitude and dealing with races and workouts and being able to get more out of workouts at sea level obviously is a hot topic, and you know, you as a coach, you have to make decisions based on, you know, you have to consider altitude, right? That's obviously a factor. So there's someone on the call now, Evan Day. I think Evan's still on. Evan asked a question about long efforts and marathon training and stuff like that. So I'll let Evan bring that up if you're still on, Evan.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Max. Thanks for the plug. And thank you, Ben, for being on. Yes, quick question. I noticed one thing really unique about NAZ Elite when it comes to like the marathoners and the buildup is long efforts at marathon effort and not necessarily, you know, a marathon pace, which I mean, for you, I don't know if it's 15, 20 seconds faster or whatever. And so I was just really curious your thoughts around the balance between getting those long sustained efforts in versus, you know, having the athlete go through that, you know, biomechanical running of marathon pace during the buildup.
It's always a work in progress, but we've been able to see that marathon effort on, let's say, Lake Mary Road, where we do a lot of those long marathon type workouts, translate really well to the New Yorks and the Bostons and obviously Atlanta and different things. You know, I think for some of the athletes, it's become more like 10 seconds, but for some of the athletes that are newer to altitude, it's more like 15 to 17 seconds per mile, which does seem like a lot. But we do go down and do things at a lower elevation so that we can get that cadence and that turnover. We also do things up at 7,000 that are at marathon effort or at marathon pace, but you know, from a heart rate perspective, from an effort perspective, they're actually more like half marathon. That transition works, or that calculation works really well. So for example, you know, you might see the men do Ks at 3:07 at 7,000 feet. Well, that's 5-minute pace. So that's kind of their marathon pace, give or take. I will say that most recently with the marathon project, which was just a pure time trial, which isn't really my favorite, but I think moving forward, like let's say we want Kellen to take a crack at the American record. I mean, a real go of it. We kind of just threw it to the wolves last time. I think we would do more work in Camp Verde at 3,100 feet. We would do more of those long efforts at that pace. I don't think it's as necessary. In fact, maybe it's detrimental. Maybe it's more of an advantage for us to do the longer efforts at 7,000 for the Bostons and the New Yorks, et cetera. But I think for those true time trials, the Chicagos and things, London, it might be better to go down. So, I'm learning just like you, but that's kind of my long-winded answer. I think it depends on the course and the type of race we're preparing for.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great perspective. Thank you.
So, yeah, I mentioned there's a nice discussion kind of brewing up in the chat here about bone stress injuries and drills and things like that. And someone asked, let's see here, there's a lot of questions coming. Ruthie asked about coming back from bone injuries. Would drills be useful before returning to running? And I think there's a really nice recent review by Rich Willey and Stu Worden and Brent Edwards on basically preventing bone stress injuries. And just a big take home is that even though bone responds really well to rate of deformation or strain rate, how quickly the bone deforms, it's important to increase the volume of loading first. So that might be some slow running for a while. And then you can start incorporating more dynamic or drills like plyometrics and things like that to help the bone adapt. And so I will share in the message. Actually, you know what? I think most of the people have my email because I send the thing. I send the Zoom link. If you email me, I can forward you the PDF for that paper. And I think it's it's going to be one of the most valuable resources for bone stress injuries that we've seen so far. So that'll be quite useful. There was a good question by Takahiro. Takahiro, I will let you ask the question if you don't mind. If you want to unmute yourself and pose a question. There you go.
Hi, I'm Takahiro. I joined from Japan, and I'm currently helping somebody who has just retired from his career as an active competitive athlete, and he's taking up a coaching role. And I have a question for Ben. If you were in that situation right now, and if you have like a year to prepare for the new role, what would you do? Like, do you visit, if you could, for example, visit any teams or scientific or academic institutions, or to talk to some athletes or coaches, or to read some books? Do you have any recommendations besides actually taking up their experience as a coach?
Yes, my recommendation is as many of the things that you listed as possible. Do as many of those things as possible, because I think that what you want to do as a coach is you want to absorb all of the different philosophies that are out there, and then you want to critically analyze those philosophies, pick and choose what you think makes sense to you, get rid of what you think doesn't make sense. And then over time, you'll begin to form your own philosophy. Now, some of that can't be done in that 1 year. It's going to happen over time. But you do want to open yourself up to other experiences besides just your own. I think that is the challenge when an athlete was very good and a very competitive runner. Oftentimes, they come out of that competitive running phase of their life, and they begin coaching and they begin just doing exactly what they did because it worked for them, quote unquote. But how do they really know that that was the best thing for them? It worked to an extent, but things are constantly changing and individuals are different. And so I would just say immerse himself or herself in all that's out there and then critically analyze. And I'll end by saying that though I am suggesting looking at a lot of different things and a lot of different philosophies, you do have to make tough decisions and create your own, because you can't be mixing everything and throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. That's not a philosophy, that's chaos. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think a lot of reading, a lot of talking to people, a lot of watching races, watching videos, and slowly beginning to create your own philosophy. And it never really ends, I have to tell you. Even as we sit here today, I'm thinking, man, I want to read that article that Max just mentioned. So you're constantly learning and evolving. Yeah.
So for everyone listening, and I can share it as well, but Rich Willie, who's actually on, he was late though, so I'll give him credit for that. He had to work. It's okay, Rich. He posted a link on the chat in a Dropbox folder, so it's fully accessible to all of you. I think he's violated some copyright laws, but Rich is kind of a Rich is he doesn't mind sharing, like all of us don't mind sharing paper. So it's right there. Again, one of the best papers I've read on bone stress injuries. So totally worthwhile taking a read and talking about that. Before we log off, I've got just based on the question that Takahiro asked about and your response, Ben, about some athletes, some coaches were athletes and they might replicate what they were doing or not. I've got to pull in Kevin Sullivan here. Not sure if Sully's still on here. But if you are, I would love to hear, and I'm sure others would as well, you know, is that something that you had to adjust, transitioning from obviously a world-class athlete to a coach? Not sure if he's still on.
I mean, I think for any athlete who is adjusting to coaching, I think there's a lot of adjustments to make, and I think for me, I think I was fortunate in that at the end of my career, I was coached by Julie Benson, who was Olympian in '96 in the 1500 meters, American Olympian, and so she had made that transition from, you know, athlete coach to coach. And I think that helped me a lot in, you know, as I was making the transition and just, you know, being able to pick her brain on, you know, how to, maybe how to evaluate, you know, athletes versus comparing athletes to myself. I think that's and it's still to this day, it is a challenge. I always find myself being like, oh, well, I did this, this, and this. Well, that doesn't always, you know, what I did or what worked for me is not going to always work for each of my individual athletes. So I think, you know, it's a constant kind of work in progress. But I think the more time you spend in learning your athletes and communicating and understanding what makes them tick and understanding that each individual is an individual, ultimately helps in that. And, you know, I think that the same thing, you know, as I got into college coaching and I took over at my alma mater, one of the things one of the sport administrators who was interviewing me reminded me was that I'm not my college coach either. And so even though that was a person that had a lot of influence on me, you know, I think it was something that Ben said was really great here a minute ago, in that, you know, you take all these concepts and influences and you try to learn as much as you can, but ultimately you have to have your own philosophy on how to coach your athletes. And I can't be Coach Warhurst or Coach Benson. You know, I have to be Coach Sullivan, and I have to make sure that, you know, the way I communicate with my athletes is the way that works best for me and them in communicating, and not try to be somebody that I'm not. I don't know if that gets to kind of what you're
yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it's a transition is likely difficult at times, but what you and Ben both mentioned about taking all that information and assessing the athletes that you have and making it happen is a great message. So we're about all out of time, everyone. Thanks, Ben, for joining. I know you've got things to do, and it's a busy weekend. You've got the crew racing, a couple of athletes racing in LA at the Sound Running Invite. If anyone's interested in watching the free stream for this event, The races are tomorrow, or sorry, Saturday, over in LA, and I believe Kellen Taylor and Danny Shanahan are racing the 5,000, both in AZ elite athletes. So I'll just post the YouTube link to the free stream from Sound Running, and you could entertain yourselves with some world class middle distance running. I'm happy to stay on, frankly, if anyone's available. I know Ben likely has to go, but there's a lot of questions about bone stress injuries, and Rich Willie is on here, and I know he's one of the co-authors on that new paper, and so I'm happy to stay on a bit longer. But if anyone has to go, this is obviously obviously I can't hold you here, so yeah, this will sort of officially conclude our session. And if anybody has any specific questions, I can pull in Rich if there's anything. Otherwise, Ben, thank you so much for being on. I think what this session accomplished today is exactly what I was hoping, is that just kind of bridging the gap between what's happening on the track in training versus what's happening in the lab, and how we think about running biomechanics and science and training and coaching. And I think it's really important for us scientists to talk to coaches and ask questions that matter ultimately. And I know that we're not all trying to solve problems in terms of injuries in elite athletes. There's a bigger public health issue with the average runner, where there's a lot of injuries and there's a big sort of economic burden on from injuries. But I think it's important to learn lessons from elite athletics from folks like you, Ben. So thanks again for being on.
Thanks, Max, for having me, and thanks to everybody. I learned a lot as well. So, if you could do this again down the road, happy to be on again.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll have Steph Bruce from NAZ in a few weeks as well. So Steph is one of those folks that just has breadth of experience and is just a very honest person and transparent. And her experience in the running world has been great. And so she'll be a great person to have on. So we'll see everyone back in a few weeks. And again, I'm happy to stay on. And if anybody has questions, just kind of pop in the chat or just unmute yourselves and ask questions. And but that'll conclude our official session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Max.
How's it going, Max? Sorry.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for popping on. Yeah, there's a bunch of questions about BSIs, and so someone asked earlier, I don't know if they're still on or not, but yeah, I took a crack at sort of summarizing things about volume transitioning into more sort of faster loading. Did I hit that right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, the load magnitude, bone tends to accumulate micro damage a little quicker with higher magnitude. And so, I mean, it kind of cuts both ways, because that's also what stimulates, more bone, so it's the balance between accumulation of micro damage and the osteogenesis to accumulate or to accommodate for that. So yeah, I mean, you need to be pretty, in the return to run process, you want to be pretty careful with adding in speed work. And I think being consistent, what we stress with our athletes is focus on consistency first and no setbacks, and then worry later on about adding in speed work.
Right. So then from a practical standpoint, would you say that just sort of easy running, which of course is relative depending on the athlete, but easy running that we might call in the coaching world might be the priority early on, likely with some, peppering in some cross training and maybe some non-impact sort of strength training, like just basic loading without plyometrics perhaps early on?
Yeah, we start doing plyometrics depending on the type of bone stress injury, but like for metatarsal stress fractures, we're pretty careful with those. But we start adding plyos in relatively early, and the reason why we do that is because the volume is low, and so we keep the number of repetitions low. So we've got high magnitude, but the reps are low. And then when you're doing the return to run, the magnitude is low, but higher volume, higher loading volume. And that's why plyometrics are a really nice bridge between running and just running like easy, as you were saying earlier, and then faster paced running, because the overall volume is quite low, so you can get away with it a little bit better.
Makes sense. And then in the paper, you discuss as well a little bit of perhaps incline uphill running, which even though when most people do hill repeats, they're not jogging. They might do some more like stride-like uphill running. But because of the incline, there's a little less load. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think Mike Bagley, I don't know if he was on here at one point, but I think he was. I think he's got some stuff coming out looking at uphill running and like for tibial bone stress. And so I think that it's worth balancing what are the ground reaction forces, but then also the fact that your soleus loads are going to be greater going up.
So it loads the bone.
I think that's some biomechanical data that we're missing yet in the literature. Is like,
gotcha.
What are we looking at there? But yeah, so yeah, with that said, yeah, I think like some bone stress injuries are gonna be a little bit careful about like doing a lot of uphill stuff. And one of those would be like a lesser trochanter, because you're gonna get a lot of tensile loading from iliopsoas. And so those can be ones you want to be able to careful.
So proximal femoral stress reactions or stress fractures.
Yeah, exactly. But other ones, I think like a low risk tibial bone stress injury, you're going to be really safe to start doing that earlier.
Gotcha. Excellent.
And what I mean by, for those who aren't familiar with what I mean by low risk, it's going to be a posterior medial tibial stress injury versus like an anterior cortex one, because those you have to be really careful with soleus loads or soleus muscle forces with those.
Right. Gotcha. Thanks, Rich. That's useful. Again, I think Rich already shared the paper in the chat, and that really any coach working with distance runners, just such a worthwhile read. Very practical. It's not one of those sciencey papers where you have to spend 2 hours looking up definitions. This is to the point, clear, practical. I can't recommend it enough to all coaches of all level. Yeah, for sure, absolutely. All right. Well, if anyone has questions, we can talk about it. Otherwise, I think it's a good evening already. Good. We covered a lot of stuff. So I will sort of truncate this a little bit with the I'll call the Rich Willie prologue, and then I'll post it up on the website as well for that.